This video is sponsored by Connell Guides. To get your hands on the most intelligent study guides on the market for GCSE and A-level English literature, as well as GCSE and A-level history, visit connellguides.com and use code RS15 at checkout for 15% off your order.
Act 3, Scene 1 is a pretty important part of William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. But why is that, and what annotations can we make for that scene? Let's find out. How's it going, Revision Squad? DystopiaJunkie here with another GCSE English Literature video for you. And in this one, we are going to annotate Act 3, Scene 1 of William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which I have nicknamed the Two Duels, given that, there are two duels in it. So, to make those annotations, I will work through the majority of Act 3, Scene 1, focusing on the part that contains those two duels. There will be more than 24 annotations made in this video, and they are going to focus on how this scene helps to create certain impressions about the play's characters, how it relates to the play's themes, and how it formally works as a piece of drama. As with my other annotation videos, I strongly suggest that you have a copy of the play in front of you, at least 3 different highlighters, and a pen to make notes with. This is the 5th of 8 annotation videos that I have planned to make for Romeo and Juliet. If this video helps you out, please do let me know. You could do that by dropping this video a like, leaving a comment on it for me to read, sharing the video around with anybody else who might benefit from watching it, and you could of course subscribe to my channel too if you haven't done so already. Alright then, let's get stuck into annotating that scene. So as I said in the video introduction, I'm going to be making annotations that relate to the play's characters, themes and form. In these annotation videos, when I say form, I mean how this extract functions as a piece of drama. That means I will focus on the extract's relation to the overall structure of the play, whether it uses any dramatic devices, what audience responses might be, and so on. Moreover, some annotations might relate to more than one category, so if you see something that is shaded both blue and green, for example, that should tell you that its comment is about how the extract relates to both the play's characters and themes. So Act 3, Scene 1 takes place in a public place in Verona. Mercutio and Benvolio and various hangers-on are walking around and are talking about the weather, more specifically how hot it is and the fiery behaviour that this encourages. Benvolio appears particularly aware of the relationship between hot weather and violence, for when he suggests that he and Mercutio should retire, this suggestion creates the impression that he is a peaceful character because he wishes to escape a brawl. Benvolio, it appears, is not too keen on fighting. Furthermore, when Benvolio muses that on hot days the mad blood is stirring, Shakespeare creates the impression that the themes of fate and violence are closely related, for Verona's warm weather on the day of Act 3, Scene 1, and the violence this triggers, appears to make the bloodshed of the rest of the scene appear predestined. Now when Mercutio responds to Benvolio's suggestion, Mercutio suggests that his friend is also prone to violence, given that he is like a pub goer who draws his sword after the second drink. Because he is disagreeing with Benvolio and making accusations about his character that more or less amounts to him calling Benvolio a hypocrite, I think we could say that Mercutio is a contrarian, a person who always disagrees with other people, thus suggesting that he is argumentative and prone to taking part in conflict. Whether or not Benvolio is a confrontational character is the topic that dominates the next part of the scene. Now Mercutio goes off on one, making a number of ridiculous claims and comparisons that relate to Benvolio's character. Now this dialogue could prompt various responses from the audience. On the one hand, Mercutio's hyperbolic accusations and ostensible ranting may be viewed as comedic, given how ridiculous he is being. This could add to the overall impression that Mercutio is a comic character, for he makes plenty of rude jokes, makes plenty of puns, and is generally full of banter throughout the play. Conversely, his accusation that Benvolio is confrontational or violent may confuse the audience, given that it contradicts with how Benvolio is presented elsewhere in the play. Now this topic quickly fades into the background once Benvolio notices that some Capulets are approaching. The way in which Benvolio and Mercutio respond to this development reveals different things about their characters. For Benvolio, we get the impression that he is a logical character because of the connotations of the noun head, whereas for Mercutio, we get the impression that he is a violent character because the noun heel sees him assert that he will easily beat the Capulets in a fight and force them to grovel at his feet. Tybalt and his associates enter the scene. The young Capulet appears to want something in particular from Benvolio and Mercutio, which is Romeo's whereabouts. So when Tybalt first speaks, it's interesting that his dialogue features politeness markers, namely gentlemen and good den, a phrase meaning good evening. Such politeness runs counter to the aggressiveness that he embodies earlier in the play, which might suggest that he is now reserving such behaviour for one person and one person only. Romeo. Now when Tybalt eventually mentions Romeo by name, Mercutio immediately interrupts him. Not only does this suggest that Mercutio is intensely loyal to Romeo, which is a typically masculine trait given the importance of male friendships in Elizabethan England, but the fact that Mercutio was so rude as to completely cut off Tybalt also reinforces the impression that he is a confrontational character. This latter idea is reinforced by how Mercutio twists Tybalt's words. To consort with someone can just mean to hang out or be associated with them, with this often being implied to be a negative thing. But a consort is also a group of travelling musicians or minstrels. Mercutio intentionally misunderstands Tybalt in order to goad him and allow the tension between the two characters to escalate. When Benvolio gives Mercutio and Tybalt options that would allow them to diffuse the situation, which he chiefly achieves through the conjunction either, and the two options that follow this, the idea that he is a peaceful character is supported because he does not want to see other people get into a fight. Mercutio's attempts at goading Tybalt are pushed to the background once Romeo enters the scene. Tybalt notices Romeo and refers to him as his man. Now of course you and I know that this just sees Tybalt expressing that the man he is looking for has arrived, but the phrase my man could also be interpreted as my servant. In classic Mercutio fashion then, Mercutio chooses to twist Tybalt's dialogue to this second impression and get severely offended as a consequence. The offence that Mercutio apparently feels relates to the theme of masculinity, for he has taken Tybalt's supposed insult of Romeo very personally, given the importance of male friendships and the loyalty that these were supposed to contain in Shakespeare's time. Tybalt is no longer polite in this part of the scene. His dialogue becomes cruel and malicious, as seen by how he expresses that he hates Romeo and insults him by calling him a villain. This suggests that family loyalty is incredibly important to Tybalt, for seeing someone who he thinks has insulted his family, something Tybalt thinks Romeo did just by turning up to the ball, has caused Tybalt to become quite nasty. This impression is reinforced once again when Tybalt calls Romeo boy, which implies that he thinks Romeo is inferior to him. Tybalt's hatred for Romeo is therefore clear for everybody to see. Does Romeo retaliate to Tybalt's aggressiveness though? No. In fact, the young Montague entirely refuses to fight him at this point in the scene. But what is the reason for Romeo's refusal? His love for Juliet appears to be the cause, for when he says that he loves Tybalt better than he canst devise, he refers to the fact that they are now family members following Romeo's marriage with Juliet in Act 2. Whereas when he says that he regards the name Capulet as dearly as his own, the adverb dearly relates to the feelings of tenderness he feels for Juliet and the Capulets at large, now that he is part of their family. Subsequently, we see that Romeo's feelings for love overpower his desire to defend his honour, for turning down a fight would have caused his reputation as a man to be harmed, which would have been seen as a threat to his honour in Shakespeare's time. The list of 3 adjectives Mercutio uses to describe Romeo's refusal shows that he despises the fact that Romeo has turned down the fight, given the consequences that this has for Romeo's honour. That is why Mercutio offers to fight Tybalt instead, because by making this honour, Mercutio is able to defend Romeo and his honour, thus highlighting the masculine loyalty that Mercutio feels for his friend. And last of all for this part of the scene, I want to look at the phrase "good king of cats," which Mercutio uses in place of Tybalt's name. The connotation of cats and the hyperbolic term king sees Mercutio suggest that Tybalt is sly and cunning, and also untrustworthy, given that cats were associated with witchcraft in Shakespeare's time. As such, the term "good king of cats," although it looks like a compliment, is in fact a massive insult. Mercutio and Tybalt then fight. As they do so, Romeo refers to how Prince Aeschylus has expressly forbidden bandying in Verona's streets, which sees him attempt to use the prince's authority to persuade Tybalt and Mercutio to stop fighting. You could even argue that by appealing to Prince's authority rather than his own, Romeo is presented as a powerless character. Now remember that stage directions are always worth having a think about, especially because it is an easy way to analyse form. So when Tybalt stabs Mercutio and runs off, I wonder if these stage directions suggest that he is a coward because he cannot face up to the consequences of his actions despite having talked such a big talk earlier on in the scene. Mercutio gets hurt and Benvolio notices this. After his friend asks him about his injury, Mercutio claims that it is a scratch. Now this use of understatement, for we know that Mercutio is wounded much worse than this, continues to suggest that he is an unserious, flippant character, for he continues to play around with language and exude bravado despite the dire circumstances he finds himself in. Romeo says that Mercutio can't be hurt too badly, which prompts a lengthy section of dialogue from Mercutio. Now this short speech provides ample analytical opportunities, but there are only 2 aspects of it in particular that I would like to look at. The phrase "grave man" bears a double meaning that is significant. You see, on the one hand, Mercutio stating that his friends will find him a grave man sees him allude to the fact that he is mortally wounded and that he knows that he will soon die. This analysis takes the expression "grave man" literally, but Mercutio does not always use words in their literal senses, does he? As such, you could interpret "grave man" as "serious man," so Mercutio might be telling his friends that he will be serious from now on. Now given that Mercutio is a comic character who frequently makes puns, this would mark a sort of spiritual death for him. Either way then, the phrase "grave man" relates to a death of some kind and therefore marks a significant turning point in the play, because its tragic elements begin to intensify and its comic qualities decline. Another formal element of Mercutio's speech that I would like to point out is the abundance of caesurae found throughout it. So all of those commas and semicolons and full stops and exclamation marks and even that question mark too. This creates a stop-start rhythm in Mercutio's dialogue, which perhaps suggests that he is struggling to speak because he has been mortally wounded. The immense pain he feels, in short, prevents him from speaking naturally. In this part of the scene, Romeo reflects on Mercutio's injury before finding out that his friend has in fact died because of it. When Romeo expresses that Juliet's beauty has made him effeminate and softened his bravery, Shakespeare suggests that romance and love are antithetical to masculinity and violence, given that Romeo's feelings for Juliet were what prevented him from fighting Tybalt, which ultimately led to Mercutio's death. Once Romeo finds out that Mercutio has indeed died, he suggests that the day's black fate but begins the woe. This sees Shakespeare foreshadow the fact that the second half of the play will be much more tragic than the first, whereas Romeo's expression that there will be more woe to come almost makes it seem predetermined, almost as if all of this woe is bound to happen by fate. Last for this section, the alliteration apparent in fire-eyed fury highlights Romeo's developing feelings of rage. All it took was for one of his best mates to be needlessly murdered. And here we have the final part of Act 3 Scene 1 that I will be making annotations for. In this part, Tybalt turns up, he and Romeo fight, Romeo kills Tybalt, and then Romeo eventually runs off. Now the strong modal verb must shows that Romeo is determined to avenge Mercutio's death, no matter what the consequences will be, for he does not seem to care if he or Tybalt or if the both of them die and join Mercutio in the afterlife. Next, I want to look at the stage directions that relate to Romeo's and Tybalt's fight. Their relative brevity and the fact that they are not broken up by any dialogue versus how the stage directions related to Tybalt's and Mercutio's fight were broken up by a dialogue, together suggest that the fight is serious and animalistic. Romeo and Tybalt do not want to taunt or goad each other with their words, they are just out for blood. Romeo mentions fortune, which is more or less synonymous with fate, after he kills Tybalt. By calling himself Fortune's fool, Romeo's dialogue suggests that fate is cruel, for he thinks that it is mocking him. This also implies that Romeo feels powerless and that his murder of Tybalt was unavoidable. And last of all, when Benvolio asks Romeo why he stays, it suggests that Romeo is stupefied and that he cannot fully comprehend what has just unfolded. Perhaps this means then that Romeo is not a naturally violent character, because he is shocked by the fact that he has mortally injured somebody else. And of that annotation made, I reckon that's a little over 24 annotations that I have made that relate to Act 3 Scene 1. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope that this video helps you out as you study or revise Shakespeare's play. If I have managed to do that, please do let me know. You could give this video a like, leave a comment on it, share it around with anybody else who might benefit from watching it, and you could of course subscribe to my channel too, if you haven't done so already. Before I finish recording then, all that there is left for me to say is that I hope that you have an awesome rest of the day. If you are studying or revising, please remember to take frequent short breaks, as a burned out student is not a happy or successful student, which is what I think you deserve to be.
So what can we say about Act 3 Scene 1? Well, we could comment on the violence apparent in both Mercutio's and Tybalt's characters. We could talk about how Benvolio is, once again, presented as quite a peaceful character. Or we could even talk about how the tension between the themes of masculinity and romance are apparent in Romeo. However, what I think is really important to talk about with this scene in mind is how it serves as a turning point for the rest of the play. For the play's comic qualities begin to decline and its tragic elements begin to escalate.